Welcome. This is Elden here on the Elemental Movement podcast, and I get to bring to life with you today the story of one of our founding members, actually the founder of the whole thing, that the rest of us have joined in with, putting that pressure
Ooh,
on you. This is this is. I'll let you introduce yourself.
yeah, I'm Matt Matteucci. I don't know what else to say.
Cool.
Good to be here.
So Matt, curious because I just put you on the spot as the founding member, which feels true to me. Can you bring us back in time to the moment when elemental movement first came into a seedling idea and where you were in your life at that time?
That's a hard question, but if I really think back to it, I think it was after a training session with a mutual friend of ours, one that I think brought us into connection, Josh Hash. And I had trained with him, and he was building his YouTube presence at the time. He he's since blown up, but he was not blown up at this point. He was but just, a couple thousand subscribers or whatever it is. And he was or we were trading ideas on if there was a way to be like working together. And I don't there wasn't really a connection between the two of us in that. Like it didn't feel like, oh, there's something here, but I like the light bulb came on of like, oh, like it would be super valuable to work with other people
Hmm.
together in a process, right? I was a personal trainer and a movement trainer, like kind of shifting towards helping people with their lives in general at that point. And it's like, what if I was working with other people that were also doing that together? And so that's I think when the idea sort of birthed in my mind.
Hmm.
And from there, opportunities presented themselves over the next months and years that started to build this thing into what we're building it now today.
Thank you. So, one of the things that I experience with people in positions where we are seeking to help other people in, I think, all contexts that I've experienced is that there's typically something that we've gone through that has really like illuminated the struggle in our own lives. And it feels really poignant for me to know that story from people that I'm working with. And so I'm curious, what was your struggle moment that really kickstarted you into wanting to help people with their lives?
I've had a couple. The first one was my like extended childhood, just
Mm.
growing up in the place that I grew up and with the family that I chose to come into the world with. We were very well off financially, but there wasn't much warmth and love in our house. And there was a lot of chaos and disorder, dysregulation, emotionally speaking. So that was where that was what I came up in. And that lack of groundedness and lack of like solid love caused a lot of suffering and turmoil in my younger years. And yeah, really hard, really hard. And in that, I came out of that, into college, very, very depressed, unable to handle social situations, unable to form meaningful and lasting relationships, very challenging and like relating to people. And I think in part it was that, and it was also in part that I'm an incredibly sensitive person and very attuned to subtler things that a lot of people may not be.
Hmm.
Um, at least that's the convention, right? We're at least trained not to be.
Hmm.
And so in being like that, it was overwhelming. And in that dark depression, I was turned on to Buddhism, ironically by my mother, who caused me a lot of that suffering, at least some of it. And when I started reading the text of Thich Nhat Hanh, that really opened my eyes to something that I had previously been completely unaware of.
Mm.
And that was, I think, the like seminal moment, like where things changed. And I realized, oh, there's something else. And since then, that was probably when I was about 18, 19. So since then, there's been a lot of more layers of suffering, and then growing from that suffering and seeking to help people. I had a very bad physical injury in my early 20s, and that really transformed things for me. And then I got really sick in my mid to late 20s with Lyme disease. And that also really changed me. And that sent me into the path of seeking out acupuncture and becoming an acupuncturist, which I
Mm.
am today. So
Mhm.
that's the kind of long story, but abbreviated.
So as you've gone through, so I really like how you brought together these kind of three primary portals of pain
Yeah.
and suffering, where there
Hmm.
was like depression, and that brought you into mindfulness,
Yeah.
and the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh and other Buddhists, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And then there was a physical injury. And is the physical injury, was that when you got into like movement culture and stuff like that, or was that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
was I was in CrossFit at the time, just like battering my body
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to like go into like competition in that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also some addiction issues at that time too that I was engaged in,
Mm-hmm.
with marijuana and to a lesser degree alcohol. And that injury was the impetus to get sober
Mm-hmm.
or to stop those substances which weren't
Mm-hmm.
serving me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also an inspiration to seek a different approach to moving my body and using it athletically, but also in a way that was in service to it, not
Mm-hmm.
just like taking from it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Working with it is a good way to put it.
Got it. And then kind of fast forwarding, you hit the Lyme disease portal,
Yeah.
and that's what spearheaded you going into acupuncture, correct?
Yeah. I previously, when I had all the injury and was dealing with my back issues in my early 20s, I had been interested in acupuncture. I had a really close friend that was a real suffering soul. He went through fucking hell, and has not, since passed. Actually,
Oh,
he
shit.
passed at the age of, I think, 26 or 27.
Mm.
This was probably 6, 7 years ago. But anyways, he was on a healing journey of his own, and he was out in Hawaii training with this acupuncturist, and looked like he was going to go that way. And then it got to be too much. Like he was confronting his demons and he was confronting his role that he played in all of this. And he was unable to do that. And
Mm.
he went into a tailspin. And that was the point where he like chose to not live.
Mm.
Right. He didn't die for several more years, but it was that moment where he had it, and if he just kept going through that pain, he would have maybe made it out
Mhm.
and stepped into this role as a healer and someone who could guide people into healing. But he just couldn't handle it, and it felt like when he it sounds weird and crazy, but it felt like when he gave that up, like it was almost like it was like that baton was passed to me.
Mhm.
So in that time, I didn't want to become an acupuncturist because I was like, oh man, there's so much school, the investment. I was doing personal training, and I was doing the movement thing, training with that cat Ido Portal, and I was kind of in the cult, and I was enjoying myself, and I was like getting really good at all these cool movement skills, and I was training people to do stuff and take care of their bodies better. And yeah, so it felt really good. And then, yeah, then I got really sick.
Mhm.
And then it was like, oh, like I took it as a sign from the universe. I got bitten by the tick that gave me Lyme disease close to where I lived, very close to where I lived, where you live now. So be
Mhm.
careful.
Mhm.
I got bitten by the tick while I was on a hike with a friend talking about the movement gym that I was going to be opening in like a couple months down the line. And so I'm like gearing up to open up this gym, and then I get horribly sick. And it's like, oh my gosh, my whole plan has to change. Like I can't open up a gym when I can't even walk.
Mm.
When I can barely talk. I can hardly
Mhm.
think. And I
So
changed paths.
take us through that healing journey too, if you would. It's like I've experienced like not being able to walk from physical injury, but never
Hmm.
experienced like what you went through in terms of like the debilitating systemic debilitation
Yeah.
from an illness.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, like, one, just what carried you through that, right? Like what allowed you to keep going? And
Mm.
two, what was it like to have to move through that?
I think what carried me through, for one, I had a really supportive girlfriend who's now my wife. And like she's generally super positive, especially when times are tough. So she recognized something wasn't right. I became really irritable and unable to elicit words like basic nouns when I was talking.
Mm,
So I'd just be like just frozen with like uhs and ums and like trying to think of that word. Oh yeah, that word's table, sort of thing. So that was really helpful to have her there supporting me through it all. I had the benefit of the physical injury, like the physical problems that would occur from it. So like I wouldn't be able to walk, like I'd walk and my knees would buckle, or I couldn't raise my arms, or I couldn't tie my hair up because my elbows were so swollen. That would only happen like 3 days out of every 2 weeks. So the other 10, 11 days, I would be able bodied, just like off. And the mind was still like, it was like off and on. And so things were like the bugs were starting to take me over. They hadn't completely taken me over. And I knew something wasn't right. Obviously, I didn't know what I was sick with. I don't go to doctors though. So I was seeing an acupuncturist at the time, and she thought I was possessed by the spirit of my friend that had just passed away,
mm,
oddly enough. And so that was a really crazy timing of it all too, right? This friend that was like going to step into healerhood and just like couldn't. And he passed away, and just like a couple months later I get stricken with this horrible illness.
mhm,
So I just felt like there was some cosmic beauty in that. But to answer your question, I arrived at the fact that it was Lyme disease per the discussing my symptoms with people, friends, and them saying I had Lyme, like you might have Lyme disease. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have Lyme disease. So once I found it out, I got tested, and I, asked my acupuncturist to order the tests, and she did, and it came back overwhelmingly positive. And in knowing that I had Lyme disease, that was a real comfort, because it's
mm,
like, okay, now I know what I have, and I caught it late. So it wasn't like I could just take antibiotics. And so I immersed myself in research
mhm,
to get myself better. I was really dead set on like, I need to get better from this. Like this is not where my story goes downward.
mm,
So there was a very intense will to get better.
mhm,
So I did a lot of things to do that. And that it made me go inward a lot, which is really good. I just know in the core of my being that when things really started to get better was there was this moment where I saw the gold of that suffering.
Mm,
And it was like seeing how valuable this experience was for me in so many different ways, how it course corrected me, changed my path, the
mhm,
path that I was destined to be on rather than this path that my mind wanted me to be on.
mm,
It opened me up to that whole perspective and like, oh my gosh, like how much am I operating from my mind and the ideas of what my life should look like rather than like, no, I'm just riding this flow and I don't really have, I have some choice, but it's not as much choice as I'd like, maybe from my mind's perspective.
mhm, mhm,
And then also the, as you were alluding at the very beginning of this conversation of having experienced that suffering, I've experienced that suffering now, and I can feel where other people are at sometimes that have been somewhere like that, and I
mhm,
can I can now better help them to to rise out of it
mm.
because I have experienced that too. I know what that's like to some degree at least.
So you shared this piece about like a moment where you were able to see the gold of your suffering, like
Hmm.
the value in it.
Yeah,
What gave you access to that?
I think the short answer is I don't know.
Mm,
The long answer is there was a lot of things I was doing that were probably in service of that.
mm,
There was a lot of meditations that I was doing. There was a lot of reading that I was doing. I think I read the book The Power of Now, and I read it months before, and I was like, well, the book was fine. And then I read it in the midst of my illness, and it was like fucking magic. And it
mm,
like really lifted me up in a
mhm,
way of like, yeah, I'm here now, and this is my circumstance, and let's not put judgment on this. Yeah, like this fucking sucks. I can barely walk and I can barely think, and I'm like, I can feel the bugs crawling in my knees, and my knees all fucking swollen, but I'm here now, and how am I gonna show up?
mm,
And then falling back on the people that genuinely, like people and just beings that genuinely cared for me and cared about me. I remember I spent a lot of time with my dogs at that time.
mm, mhm,
My four-legged friends were really integral to me coming out of those depths,
mhm,
right? Just sitting with me, just sitting with them,
mhm,
getting out into the
mhm,
nature was big
mhm,
too.
mhm,
Just sitting in the
mhm.
nature. So, yeah, that's what comes to mind for sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's almost like so everything that you shared to me like falls into the lens of like kind of going inward,
Hmm.
um, and focusing on what you can do, like the
Yeah.
reading, the meditating, the like slowness. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. So I'm gonna pivot here if you're ready.
Hmm.
Um, if you're fast forwarding to now at this place where you're at, both geographically, mentally, physically, spiritually, all of it. When you're looking back at these different portals that we just talked about, there's kind of like those three that we talked about, really that we named, you named.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there's others that you can track if you're really trying to. What is the commonality, the like the connective thread?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is suffering. It's the things that we characterize as negative experience and how it can elicit what someone could characterize as positive effects,
Mm,
right? It really brings in that Taoist proverb, uh, Taoist farmer proverb or a
mm,
parable,
mhm, mhm.
right?
You gonna tell the story?
No,
I'll
people
look it
can
up.
look it up if they'd like.
Look it up.
It's a good one.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. So now you're here. You've gone through the suffering. You figured out how to alchemize it and create the gold, the positive. Um,
Yeah.
how are you interacting with the lessons that you've learned throughout the years now, like in your personal life and your practice? And like what's coming up as you're doing that?
Well, first, I'd like to reframe the, you said create the gold. And I feel like I received the gold.
Cool.
Like I was given it.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel that. I didn't create anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just had to surrender and like basically just like belly up, just like, yeah, you win. You win, universe. And in that surrender, I was able to receive it.
Mm-hmm.
So that feels so like something I have to say.
Yeah, that's powerful.
But sorry, what was the question?
That forget the question. What you just brought in is so this surrender energy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? And where is it hardest for you to do
Mm-hmm.
it?
It's probably hardest to do for me in my life right now in my relationship with my wife,
Mm,
the person who I'm closest with.
mm-hmm,
But then, extending outwards, just in relationship with people that I'm in conflict with.
mm,
I'm probably
mm-hmm.
in conflict with my wife the most often because we spend so much time together. We're
Sure.
trying to build this life together, and there's competing needs and competing values. We have a lot of alignment, but no one's a
Mm,
perfect match for another in some ways. So that would be boring. So yeah, their conflicts arise. And so it's really hard when you're in that conflict energy to just be like, just to drop it and just to surrender. Right.
mm-hmm.
And in that too, like sometimes it's not the right call too, right? Sometimes you have to stand up for what you feel and believe, but it's like, where is that coming from? Is I think
Mm,
a good thing to think about, right? Is that coming
mm-hmm,
from what you think things should be like and the shit that you're bringing in, your past context,
mm-hmm.
like my need for those needs, or is it coming from like my like root and like that inner knowing
Mm.
that
How do you
really
how do you know? How do you
for
know?
me for me it's my body tells me. I
Okay.
get these like tingles down my spine and down into my sacrum when like it's like really in alignment. It's like, yeah.
Mm-hmm,
And it's rad because there's certain people that like I'll hear them talk and I'm just getting that sensation constantly because they're tapped in people, right?
mm-hmm,
And that's super cool. So for those people, it's easy to surrender to that because I'm like, oh, okay, that's where I need to surrender. That's what informs me of where I need to just like, okay, I need to shut up and listen.
So in the moments when you don't have that,
Mhm.
what supports you in being able to shut up and listen?
That's it's a big question that again, I don't think I have the full answer to. When I do the practices that I do on a consistent basis, when I'm consistent with them, when I get out into the forest and I tap in to the mother and the father, the cardinal directions, the animal spirits that provide me wisdom and guidance in this stage of my life and my own purpose.
Mm,
And I do a little gentle movement while doing that and process through the junk that I've experienced the day before and the days before. Then I'm able to get there pretty gracefully.
mm-hmm,
If I don't do that, and if I spend time with people that are not practicing that as well, it's a little bit stickier.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's yeah, I feel like I get a little turmoil before I'm like, okay, let's keep let's keep back on what you were doing there. There's a reason why you're
Mm,
doing that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that kind of put you on the spot with those questions just now.
no, I
And
love it. I love being on the spot.
cool. because I find so much value in the reflection of like the well, when I listen to you, Matt, like I feel like you do a good job of like remaining humble in the way that you share information about yourself.
Mm,
Like I don't feel a lot of grandiosity coming off of you when it comes to like oh, I'm a super like da 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 da. It's like
yeah.
I actually don't know, and I feel like that's such a valuable thing for me and for others to hear
Mm.
is like this acknowledgement of the challenge and the acknowledgement of the challenge from a place of like knowing ways to move through it more gracefully and then also knowing ways that don't move through it gracefully and like
Yeah.
how do you find the balance and that's actually that balance like you're in a position right now where you've got two young children, you've got your relationship with your wife, you just moved your entire life to a new place, and like I can only imagine that the balance equation has gotten really messed with during that process. And so I'm curious for you, like during this like massive transition, as you're still moving through it, and as you're finding ground, like how have you managed to work with your practices to be able to keep some semblance of balance during that?
A lot of compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing looks like how I want it to look like. It's all what I can get. And working, yeah, getting what I can, but maybe not getting as much as I want,
Mm,
right? And getting rid of organizing my life in a way that I'm not engaging as much as I can. And when I make mistakes, I'm very quick to recognize the mistakes I make of like where I've dedicated my energy in a way I didn't want to dedicate it.
mm,
So there's like, okay, I did this and it did not feel good.
mm-hmm,
I'm not going to engage my energy there because that's not valuable. Because there's just, in the nature of where I am in my life, there's just not quite enough to go around. So I can't make costly errors,
mm,
which is
mm-hmm.
a luxury I look forward to having at some point again.
Sure.
But
So you've mentioned a couple times like the mistakes and then like this piece of like your body. Like I feel your body really present in
mhm.
knowing when you've done something that's in alignment with what you're needing and when it's not.
Yeah.
And you'd shared about like the tingles in the spine. Can you also bring to life for us the opposite of that? Like when you know
Ah,
like
yes.
yeah.
Love that you asked that question. I was hoping you would. I mean, it can be very subtle.
Mm-hmm,
And for me, it's a shutting down. I feel like a constriction on my sacrum,
mm,
a tightening up of my body, right? When there's certain people that I spend time with that I'm like, ugh, like I just feel my body tensing up,
mm-hmm,
right? That's a really good indication. And I view whenever I get physically injured, I I view that as I was out of alignment in some way. In some way, I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. And there's information to be gleaned, not just on a physical level. It's not just like, oh, the pattern of which I was pulling was slightly off here. No, fuck that. Like, it's usually I was too tired and I should not be training right now, or the nature of this training session that I was doing was just not like the vibe was not right. Right. There was something off here. And I'm just kind of putting up with this and not speaking up and not like at the very least stepping away when it doesn't feel right to me.
mm-hmm,
Whether, if I'm training with a group of people and they're doing something, it's like, okay, like you guys keep doing what you're doing, but for me, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to leave because I know it feels right. If I ignore that sensation, I might get injured.
mm-hmm,
Right. And what a beautiful lesson to have there. Right. It's a confirmation for me that I should listen to that little voice that's telling me, my
mm-hmm,
body that's telling me that.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. So my body, I feel very blessed that my body really like informs me of where to divert my energy and, to make those to not make those costly mistakes.
mm,
And only if I ignore what it's telling me, do those
Mhm.
costly mistakes happen?
Mhm. I really love what you're like. I love the body thing that you brought in of like the yes and the no. I'm just gonna toss this in, right? It's like you're in human design, like you're a sacral being, right? And so like I'm also a sacral being, so that resonates with me. I want to also acknowledge there are other types of beings. So if anybody listening to this doesn't know their human design type, energy type, I would highly recommend checking it out. It's really valuable information from my perspective. Um, and Matt, there's this thing that you're bringing through here of, and I want to just take a moment to pause, because as I'm listening to you, I'm listening to the person that you are today share about their relationship with their body and the embodied sense of a yes and a no, and that little voice of the yes and the no, and how they communicate. And at least for myself, and I'm projecting this onto you, I'm imagining that there has been a genesis of building that trust, and that voice has probably always been there, but there's probably been times in your life where you interacted with it differently than you do now. And I'm curious, and I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but if we're focusing specifically on that voice, can you share a little bit about how your relationship with that voice has evolved and changed over time?
Yeah. Up until the last few years, and I would say that relationship changed drastically with the getting Lyme disease, and before that, the injury. But in my early 20s, but even after that injury, it was still this kind of I am the master of my body, this self mastery, and like just pushing, and almost an ignoring of that voice. And I don't want to like beat myself up over it. Like I have compassion for my previous self because I didn't have people to like strong people presences in my life did not educate me on listening to that voice.
Hmm.
There might have been, some random, elder type person or older person that had that information or that knowledge and wisdom that may have shared like a little nugget for me at one point here or there, but they weren't, strong enough presences in my life. They were maybe someone I just like crossed paths with for just a moment. So it didn't sink in, right? And it was
Mhm.
only through the sufferings that this finally sunk in. Yeah, and I have to give some love to my former mentor, acupuncture mentor,
Mhm.
a woman, Peggy Arendt, who I've fallen out of touch with, but I love dearly nonetheless. She really worked with me throughout my genesis into becoming an acupuncturist with stop trying so hard. She would practically yell at me, almost yell at me, very sternly talking to me while I'm like taking pulses or like trying to like feel what I'm just trying. I'm trying. I'm not letting things come to me. And
Mhm.
she's like, stop trying so hard. And I'm like, I'm trying to stop trying so hard. It's this like paradoxical, like, yeah, sick joke, but it just takes time, right? To
Mhm.
like unwind those layers of just fucking shit, that's from, like the capitalistic forces in our lineage that's been battered by all sorts of things, whether you want to use the word colonialism or religion or I don't even know what words really to
Mhm.
that can capture it, but those are I think the closest ones, this programming that's been imposed on us for my ancestors probably hundreds if not 1,000 years.
Mhm.
And so that programming is in me and is imparted onto me from a very, very young child. Yeah. I'm still I'm still working at it too.
Mhm.
Right. Like I have not arrived. Like I've just peeled back more layers. And
Mhm.
then I get to like the next layers. I'm like, get those next layers. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
How much do I
Hmm.
have to suffer before I can peel those layers too?
It's reminding me of I believe it's Josh Waitzkin, The Art of Learning is a book. It's a good book. It talks about making smaller circles. And what you just said, like, it's like this genesis of like the circles being really big and really painful and like
Mm-hmm.
life shattering,
Yeah.
to like the genesis of now like making smaller circles where it's not that you don't get out of balance, it's not that you don't like make mistakes, but
Mm-hmm.
you notice them more quickly and are able to pull yourself back to center more quickly. It's cool. It's cool. So you spoke to this programming piece, and I want to hone in on it for a sec, because there's all these, like, you named some of the labels that we could put on there, and without labeling
Mm-hmm.
the archetypal representative, however we want to put it, if you're tapping into the inherited program that you got in your body through your placement within society and lineage, how does that show up in your body and in your mind?
I mean, it shows up in like there's a lot of constriction,
Mm.
tightening
Hmm.
up.
Hmm.
There's a lot of forward, 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 like pushing forward and like always having to be on task, always having to produce,
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
productive,
Hmm.
don't rest, don't sit down, don't just be, don't play, just keep going and make sure you're doing something that is productive. That's a lot. That's a lot of it. There's also, I think there's the judge too of those that are
Hmm.
not doing that. If I then like look at other people, then it's like, oh, I'm being productive. Weren't these people being productive? It's been fascinating though, because in my new iteration that I'm, have experienced of myself, I find myself wildly drawn to those that aren't very productive, in quotations.
Yeah.
And those that do not engage in the capitalist conventions
Hmm.
that many of us in our society find ourselves in.
So what I heard you say is that there's like a physiological tension and constriction that happens, that there is like a focus point, like a linear forward based focus point, and then
Mm-hmm.
mental constructs of judgment and productivity, probably judgment of yourself and judgment of others, with this lens of
Yep.
being productive in a certain context of the word productive.
Yes. Yes.
If you're feeling into the relationships in your life, past and present,
Mm-hmm.
what has been the impact of that type of energy on your relationships to loved ones?
That energy first definitely drives people away. I don't, fortunately, unfortunately, I don't let that leak out too much to other people.
Mm-hmm.
It more gets internalized and just like wreaks havoc within myself. But I would be foolish to say that it doesn't leak out in like unconscious and sneaky ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's present, so it gets out there, it leaks out. It's very under the surface, unseen, and only those that are like the most sensitive would really feel it
Mm-hmm.
coming off of me.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of everyone else might feel it, but they don't know that it's there, like on like a knowing level. Like their
Mm-hmm.
systems would feel it, but their consciousness wouldn't know.
So, second question, same thread.
Mm-hmm.
How have you noticed that your relationships have changed, and how have they changed as you've brought more of your awareness and focus to more of like the, what I'll just call like the wild, in quotes, aspects of self, like the
Mm-hmm.
ones that just know what to do without having to fit into conformity?
Yeah. Well, I've formed a lot more super rad friendships
Mm.
because of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I think of the other members of our team,
Mm-hmm.
elemental movement team, yourself, Isla, and Alika. All three of you are beautiful souls that are really tapped in your own ways. And if I came in with that productive judge, I have a name for him. He's called Frederico. He's a regal motherfucker. And if I came in with Frederico, you guys would be like, fuck that noise. I'm out of here. And because of my awareness of this motherfucker, I'm able to put him aside and show up with my heart. And y'all feel that. And we've had a relationship in this entity that we're forming for the better part, like over a year now. So that's pretty fucking rad. And there's a lot of other relationships that I've formed over the last couple of years that have that same resonance. So yeah, it's forming these much sweeter, much richer relationships.
Generally speaking, in those relationships, do you find yourself able to relax more?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like that positive feedback loop, right? It's like if I'm in relationships that are coming from that other place, you know, you're tight, you're constricted, and like those are the people that make you tight and constricted, right? And there's just this like it's not the resonance you want to be like I want to be in versus these other ones. It's like, oh, like this is what's possible. So yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel like you want to share about yourself and your journey?
No, I don't think so. You've really unturned a lot of stones here, and I appreciate it.
I felt that. Felt like I was turning over stones. Thanks for letting us look under them.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you for letting us see you and hear you and feel that resonance. I guess there's one thing that I just want to put on here. It's like a lot of what we covered is very connected, in my perspective, to our nervous systems.
Absolutely.
And the states of our nervous system and the transitions between those states. And one of the things that I'm carrying from this conversation is a reaffirmation of my awareness that we co-regulate constantly, whether it's bringing us into or out of harmony.
Yeah,
we're constantly like in the interplay between our nervous systems, and it feels really beautiful to me and supportive to me to hear the reflection of the impact of relationships that are bringing us closer to harmony.
Big yes from my body right there.
And just to remember that it's possible to do that, or to learn that it's possible to do that, right? For me, it's a remembering, but I've encountered other people where it's like, wait, what? We get to do that? The wind just blew the door open.
Saying yes, brother Elden.
Yeah.
You are correct.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, man.
Thank you for that reflection.